The glittering champagne flutes of the Blackwood family clinked in a toast to their own success. At the far end of the table sat Emily Vance, the forgotten relative, the family joke, dressed in a simple wool dress that cost less than their appetizers. They laughed at her, pointing to her modest job and her quiet demeanor. But they didn't know the secret her mother protected for 30 years. Tonight, the laughter will die. Because the woman they're mocking isn't just a poor relation. She's the true heir, and she's about to inherit everything they have. The invitation was an anomaly, a thick cream-colored rectangle of cardstock that felt absurdly heavy in Emily Vance's small Brooklyn mailbox. It had been forwarded from her old apartment, then her older one, chasing her through a life of rented rooms and quiet anonymity. The embossed crest of the Blackwood family was arrogant, a golden griffin clutching a diamond. Emily was a Vance, not a Blackwood. The distinction was crucial. Her grandmother, Amelia Vance, née Pendleton, had been the great shame of the Pendleton dynasty, the daughter who had run off with a penniless musician instead of merging with another banking family. The other Pendleton daughter, Cassandra, had done her duty marrying into the ambitious but new money Blackwood family. For 2 generations, the Blackwoods had managed the vast Pendleton global enterprises, a sprawling empire of shipping real estate and private equity. And for 2 generations, they had treated the Vance line as a regrettable stain, a branch of the family tree that had withered and fallen off. Emily, at 30, was the last of the Vances. She was an archivist at the Morgan Library and Museum, a job she adored, surrounded by the silent, leather-bound stories of people long gone. She lived in a 400-square-foot studio, ate takeout, and her one luxury was a monthly contribution to her meager 401k. The invitation was for the annual Founders' Dinner, a celebration of Arthur Pendleton, the cantankerous patriarch who had built the empire. Emily hadn't seen the Blackwoods since she was 10 at a disastrous Christmas party, where her cousin Julian had accidentally spilled an entire bottle of ink on her only party dress, claiming she looked better as a Rorschach test. She should have thrown the invitation away, but her late mother's voice echoed in her mind. They are arrogant, Emily, but they are still family. Never let them forget we exist. We are Pendletons just as much as they are. So she went. She took the F train to the 4 train, her simple charcoal grey wool dress hidden beneath her practical winter coat. She emerged onto the Upper East Side, a neighborhood that felt like a different climate zone. The air was thinner, the silence punctuated only by the click of designer heels on flagstone. The Blackwood mansion was a limestone fortress on 67th Street, its windows blazing with light defying the November chill. A stern butler who looked her up and down as if she were a delivery person arriving at the wrong entrance finally let her in. The foyer was a marble expanse that echoed the sound of her scuffed heels. She could hear them already, the high, brittle laughter of Beatrice Blackwood, her great-aunt, and the booming, self-satisfied voice of Marcus, the family's current patriarch. She shed her coat, revealing the dress. It was modest, high-necked, and perfectly appropriate for her job. Here, surrounded by silk sequins and jewels that could pay her rent for a decade, it was a social crime. Beatrice glided over her face a perfect taut mask. "Emily, you came." Her eyes flicked over Emily's dress. "How wonderfully practical of you." "Aunt Beatrice," Emily said, her voice quiet but firm. "Thank you for the invitation." "Yes, well, we do try to include everyone," Beatrice said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Julian, look who's here. It's your little cousin, the librarian." Julian Blackwood, 32, and already sculpted by the entitlement of a man who had never been told no sauntered over. He was handsome in the sharp, angular way of a predator. He held a glass of what Emily guessed was 25-year-old Scotch. "Emily, still playing with dusty books, are we?" He smirked, leaning in conspiratorially. "I hope you didn't take the subway. The grime is just so hard to get out of one's clothes." Emily met his gaze. "It's an archive, Julian, and the subway was fine, thank you." "Well, hurry along," Beatrice chirped, dismissing her with a wave. "Dinner is being served. You're at the end, dear, with the younger cousins." Emily was escorted to the far end of a magnificent 30-foot-long dining table, a football field of polished mahogany. She was seated next to two sullen teenagers, scrolling through their phones, and across from a second cousin twice removed, who was already half drunk. The main family. Marcus Beatrice Julian and his vapid fiancée, Chloe, were enthroned at the head 29 feet away. The dinner, Emily felt, had officially begun. The first course arrived, a single colossal scallop, resting on a bed of squid ink risotto dotted with gold leaf. Emily stared at it. It was beautiful, but it represented more than her weekly grocery budget. The distant cousins poked at theirs, whispering about a ski trip to Gstaad. At the head of the table, the conversation was loud, performative, and centered on one person, Julian. "The Singapore acquisition was brilliant, Julian," Marcus boomed, raising his glass. "Finalizing the deal on the 15th was a masterstroke." "It was nothing, Father," Julian said, though his posture screamed self-congratulation. "Just cleaning up the portfolio. Grandfather Pendleton let too many assets stagnate. He was old-fashioned." Beatrice laughed, a sound like tiny bells. "Oh, Arthur was a romantic. But romance doesn't fund the foundation, does it? It takes a real man, a practical man, to run an empire. Like my Julian." Emily felt a small hot spike of anger. Her grandmother had been the romantic, and her great-grandfather, for all his faults, had built this. Julian was just a parasite born on third base and convinced he'd hit a triple. She focused on her scallop, cutting it into tiny, precise pieces. She was an archivist. She knew how to be silent, how to observe, how to wait. The main course was served a perfectly pink rack of lamb. The wine, a deep Bordeaux, was poured by gloved waiters. The conversation had stalled for a moment, and in that lull, Julian's gaze found Emily. His eyes glittered with a familiar, bored cruelty. "Oh, I've been meaning to ask," he called out, his voice silencing the table. All heads turned. "Emily, how is the common man faring? Tell us. We're all so insulated up here." Emily froze her fork halfway to her mouth. The teenagers beside her looked up from their phones, suddenly interested in the blood sport. "I wouldn't know, Julian," Emily said evenly. "I'm just a woman." A few people tittered. Julian's smile widened. He hadn't gotten the reaction he wanted. "No, really," he pressed, leaning forward. "That little job of yours at the... what is it?" "The public library." "The Morgan Library and Museum," Emily corrected softly. "It's a private collection." "Ah, a private collection," Julian boomed as if she'd said something hilarious. "Well, that's something, I suppose. Tell me, do you get to shush people? Is that the main thrill? Or is it the satisfaction of stamping those little cards? Do they even still use those?" Laughter erupted from the middle of the table. Chloe, his fiancée, giggled and hid her face behind her napkin. "It's mostly archival preservation and digital cataloging," Emily said, her cheeks burning. She refused to look away. "Digital cataloging?" Julian clapped his hands. "My God, how thrilling. And the pay, it must be. Well, dozens of dollars, I'm sure." The laughter was louder now. "It's enough," Emily said. Enough for what? A cousin named Daphne chimed in, emboldened. Enough for that dress, it's very sensible. Now, Daphne, Beatrice said, a fake pout on her lips. Not everyone can appreciate haute couture. Some people are just built for the rack. It's a matter of breeding. The final insult landed. Breeding. The direct implication Emily as a Vance was poorly bred, an inferior bloodline. Emily placed her silver fork and knife neatly on her plate, parallel to each other. The thwack of the metal on the china was surprisingly loud in the momentary silence. She looked first at Beatrice. My mother taught me that breeding is about character, aunt, not thread count. She then turned her gaze back to Julian. And yes, Julian, I stamp things. I preserve history. It's quiet work. It's real work. It's not just living off the fumes of a man who died 50 years ago. The table went dead silent. Julian's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine fury. He had been publicly challenged, however quietly, by the family. Nothing. Marcus Blackwood slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. That is enough, Emily. You are a guest in this house. You will show respect to the man who will one day be running the company that I might add you are not a part of. Father, it's fine, Julian said, recovering, waving a dismissive hand. She's just lashing out. It's understandable. Poverty makes people so prickly. Let her have her little moment. He raised his glass, that infuriating smirk back in place. A toast to the Vances. May they one day learn that it's better to be rich and silent than poor and... What was that word, Emily? Oh yes, relevant. They laughed. They all laughed at her. They drank their wine, and the conversation moved on, leaving her isolated at the end of the table, a living ghost in a wool dress. Emily picked up her water glass. Her hand was perfectly steady. She took a slow, deliberate sip. She felt the eyes of the family on her, the pity, the contempt, the amusement. They thought they had won. They thought they had put her back in her place. She looked at the clock on the grand mantel. 7:45 p.m. They had no idea what was coming. Dessert was a needlessly complex chocolate sphere that melted when the waiter poured hot caramel sauce over it. As the final plates were cleared, Marcus Blackwood stood tapping his glass with a spoon. Friends, family, he began, beaming. He was a portly man, but he carried himself with the unassailable confidence of someone whose wealth insulated him from all consequences. Tonight is a special night. We gather every year to honor my wife's father, Arthur Pendleton. A great man, a visionary. He paused, glancing at a set of notes. But this year is different. It marks a transition. As you know, I have been the steward of Pendleton Global for 30 years, guiding it, growing it, making it the titan it is today. Emily resisted the urge to roll her eyes. He'd guided it by firing 20,000 employees in the 90s, and grown it by leveraging its assets into near-catastrophic debt, which only a timely government bailout had fixed. But I am not getting any younger, Marcus continued with a fake paternal sigh. It is time for new blood, new vision, and so it is my profound pleasure to announce that the board of directors at a special meeting this morning unanimously approved the final transfer of leadership. He placed his hand on Julian's shoulder, who stood up to join him. As of tomorrow, November 14th, my son Julian Blackwood will assume the titles of Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Pendleton Global Enterprises. A robust, slightly forced round of applause filled the room. Julian raised his glass, his teeth gleaming. Thank you, Father. Thank you all. I promise to take Grandfather's legacy and, well, to be frank, to make it finally turn a real profit. It's a new era. To Julian, Marcus roared. To Julian, the family echoed. They all stood raising their glasses. Emily remained seated. Her lack of movement drew Julian's eye. He frowned, but before he could make another cutting remark, the deep, resonant bong of the front doorbell echoed through the house. A sudden, unwelcome silence fell. Nobody visited the Blackwoods unannounced. The butler, looking flustered, appeared at the dining room archway. "Mr. Blackwood, apologies, sir. There are visitors. They insist it is urgent." "Urgent?" Marcus barked, his good mood evaporating. "What is the meaning of this? I told staff, no interruptions." "They are from a law firm, sir. They say it concerns the estate." "The estate is settled," Marcus snapped. "Get rid of them." "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Blackwood." A new voice, crisp and cold as the November air, cut through the room. Two people, a man and a woman, stepped past the butler. They were both dressed in severe, impeccably tailored black suits. They looked like high-end undertakers, or as Emily instantly recognized, senior litigators. The man was older, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. The woman was in her 40s, sharp, with an aura of absolute uncompromising competence. She carried a thick, leather-bound briefcase. "Marcus Blackwood?" the man asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it commanded the room. "I am," Marcus said, bristling, "and you are trespassing. This is a private dinner." "My name is Harrison Thorne," the man said, handing Marcus a card. "And this is my colleague, Ms. Isabel Reed. We are senior partners at Cravath, Swain and Moore. We are here tonight as the sole legal executors of the estate of Arthur Pendleton." A nervous ripple went through the room. "Executors?" Beatrice scoffed, stepping forward. "That's impossible. Our firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, has handled the estate for 50 years. They handled the management." Ms. Reed corrected, her voice precise. "We handled the disposition. We have been waiting as per our client's instructions for this specific date, November 13th. The eve of the day, his first great-grandchild, that would be you, Mr. Blackwood." She nodded at Julian. "Turns 32. "What is this nonsense?" Julian said, stepping down from his father's side. "Some kind of legal prank. The board voted today. It's done. I'm in charge." "The board," Mr. Thorne said, consulting a document from his briefcase, "voted to appoint you interim CEO contingent upon the final release of the Pendleton majority shares, which are held in a blind trust. A trust that until 1 hour ago was sealed." "Sealed by whom?" Marcus demanded. "By our client, Mr. Arthur Pendleton," Thorne replied. "He left rather specific instructions, and a final codicil to his will that was to be read only upon this night in the event that you—" He motioned to Marcus. "Attempted to install your son as his successor." "Attempted." Marcus was turning a deep shade of purple. "I did install him, precisely," Ms. Reed said, opening her briefcase with a sharp click, "which triggers Article 4, Section 2B of the will, the character clause." The room was so quiet, Emily could hear the faint ticking of the mantel clock. Julian laughed a short, nervous bark. "A character clause? What is this, a Dickens novel?" "Your great-grandfather was a specific man, Mr. Blackwood," Thorne said, adjusting his glasses. "He was also, you may recall, a man who built his empire from nothing. He had very strong opinions on entitlement and poor breeding." He stressed the last two words, and Emily felt, rather than saw, Beatrice Blackwood flinch beside him. "He was Concerned, Thorne continued that the Blackwood line, as he put it in his private correspondence, had become soft, arrogant, and diluted from the realities of true work. He feared you would treat his company like a playground. "This is slander," Beatrice shrieked. "Arthur loved us." "He did," Ms. Reed agreed softly. "Which is why he left your family 20% of the company's shares, this house, and the properties in Aspen and St. Bart's, a more than generous provision." Julian's face went white. "Wait, 20%? We control the estate. We control the majority." "No." Mr. Thorne said, his voice laced with the ice of legal finality. "You never did. You controlled the board, which he allowed. But the controlling interest, 51% of Pendleton Global Enterprises, was placed by Arthur Pendleton into a sealed, irrevocable trust 50 years ago." Marcus looked as if he was about to have a stroke. "A trust for who?" Mr. Thorne and Ms. Reed did not look at Marcus. They didn't look at Julian or Beatrice. They both turned in perfect unison, and their eyes scanned the length of the table. They passed the drunken cousin. They passed the teenagers, and their gaze landed with absolute, unwavering certainty on Emily. The air in the dining room was thick and unbreathable. Every eye followed the lawyer's gaze to the small, quiet woman at the end of the table. Emily felt the weight of their collective stare like a physical blow. She sat her hands folded in her lap, her back perfectly straight. "What is this?" Julian's voice was a strained whisper. "What are you looking at her for?" Mr. Thorne cleared his throat. He held up a thick vellum envelope sealed with the dark red wax of the Pendleton crest. "As I said, Mr. Pendleton was a specific man. He believed his empire should be inherited not by the bloodline that expected it, but by the one that deserved it. He was to be blunt disgusted by the way his daughter Amelia, Mrs. Vance, was treated by this family after her scandalous marriage." "Amelia was a fool," Beatrice spat. "She threw her life away on a poet. She did." Mr. Thorne agreed, and in doing so, she proved to her father that she valued something more than his money. This, he felt, made her line the only one worthy of inheriting his real legacy. He wrote a codicil, a final binding testament. Ms. Reed stepped forward, taking the envelope. "This document was executed on March 1st, 1975. It has been held in our firm's vault with explicit instructions. It states that the 51% controlling interest in Pendleton Global Enterprises was to be held in the Amelia Vance Trust." She paused, looking directly at Emily, "until the sole surviving heir of Amelia Vance's line reached the age of 30, and provided that said heir had met 2 conditions." "Conditions," Marcus muttered, clutching the back of a chair. Ms. Reed read from the document. "Condition 1. The heir must have been gainfully employed in a field of humble service or academic pursuit for no less than 5 years. She looked up. "Ms. Emily Vance has been an archivist at the Morgan Library for 7 years. Condition 2. Ms. Reed continued, her voice gaining strength. The heir must not have in any way attempted to contact the executors, petition the family for funds, or otherwise shown any grasping, gold-digging, or Blackwood-esque tendencies." The insult written 50 years ago hung in the air. "This is insane," Julian exploded. "She's a librarian. She doesn't know the first thing about private equity or shipping logistics. This would ruin the company." "Mr. Pendleton disagreed," Thorne said, taking over. "He believed a century of rapacious, arrogant men had done enough damage. He wanted, and I quote from his personal letter to us, someone who knows the value of $1 because they've had to earn it. Someone who respects the past. Someone who knows how to be quiet and read the damn room. He felt an archivist was in fact the perfect choice. Emily felt her vision swim. She wasn't just sitting at the table. She was the reason for the trust. This whole time, her quiet life, her modest job, her refusal to beg the Blackwoods for anything. It hadn't been a weakness. It had been a test she hadn't even known she was taking. And so, Mr. Thorne concluded, the trust contained a trigger. It was set to dissolve and transfer ownership to the heir on their 30th birthday, unless the Blackwood-appointed board attempted to install an unvetted heir to the CAO position first, which Mr. Blackwood you did this morning. You knew, Marcus whispered. We were informed of the board vote at 11:04 a.m., Ms. Reed said. As per our instructions, that action immediately triggered the entitlement clause, accelerating the transfer. The electronic transfer of the 51% share block from the trust to Ms. Vance's name was finalized by the SEC and the Banking Commission at 6:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 2 hours ago. She closed her briefcase. The sound was like a gavel. This dinner is lovely. But it is, I'm afraid, legally irrelevant. Mr. Thorne stepped forward and walked the entire length of the table. He stopped directly in front of Emily, who finally slowly rose to her feet. The entire family watched their faces a mask of horror and disbelief. He bowed his head slightly. Miss Emily Vance, on behalf of Cravath, Swain and Moore, and the estate of your great-grandfather, Arthur Pendleton, may I be the first to congratulate you. You are the majority shareholder and the rightful owner of Pendleton Global Enterprises. For a full 30 seconds, the only sound in the room was the faint, frantic breathing of Beatrice Blackwood. Julian stood as if frozen, his champagne glass still held aloft from the toast to himself. Then he dropped it. The crystal flute shattered on the hardwood floor, a sharp, violent sound that broke the spell. "No!" he roared, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "I don't accept this. This is a fraud. A coup. This is madness," Marcus echoed, finding his voice. He jabbed a thick finger at Emily. She can't even balance a checkbook. She's a child. I am 30 years old. Uncle Marcus, Emily said. Her voice, so long quiet, was now astonishingly clear. It didn't tremble. It didn't waver. It simply was. And I am, as Mr. Thorne just explained, your new boss. Beatrice let out a high, keening wail. Our life's work, given to her, the little grey mouse. This will not stand, Julian shouted, advancing on the lawyers. Our firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, will have you disbarred. We will litigate this into dust. We will tie her up in court until she's 80. She'll never see a dime. Mr. Thorne, who had dealt with angry, entitled men for 40 years, didn't even blink. He looked at Julian with an expression of mild disappointment. Mr. Blackwood, please, he said, as one would to a toddler having a tantrum. Do you really think Arthur Pendleton was that naive? Do you think we are? He tapped his briefcase. This isn't just a will, sir. It's a fortress. It was vetted by 2 separate federal judges and the New York State Attorney General's office in 1975. But your great-grandfather knew you would be emotional. He added, Ms. Reed said, her voice cutting like a razor, a no-contest clause, a rather robust one. What no contest clause? Marcus demanded, his bluster fading into raw panic. The one, Thorne said, that states that if any member of the Blackwood family or any firm acting on their behalf challenges the legitimacy of the Amelia Vance Trust, its execution or its heir, the Blackwood family's remaining 20% stake in Pendleton Global is immediately and irrevocably forfeited. The blood drained from Marcus's face. Forfeited, Beatrice whispered. Forfeited to whom? Mr. Thorne allowed himself a very small, very dry smile. Given Miss Vance's profession, Mr. Pendleton thought it only fitting. The 20% share block, currently valued at approximately $2 billion, would be liquidated and donated to the New York Public Library system. Julian looked like he had been physically struck. All the fight went out of him. The threat of losing 51% was bad. The threat of losing everything, of going from a billionaire to a mere multi-millionaire with only a house and a jet, was unthinkable. It was corporate extinction. All eyes in the room. The cousins, the fiancé, the staff peering from the kitchen were now on Emily. They were no longer looking at her with contempt or pity. They were looking at her with something new. Fear. Emily took a step forward, away from the shadows of the cheap seats. She walked along the side of the long table, her sensible heels clicking on the floor. She stopped when she was parallel with the head of the table, standing directly across from her 3 stunned relatives. She picked up Julian's untouched dessert plate. She looked at the melted chocolate sphere. A new era, Julian. I believe you're right. She turned her gaze sweeping over the family. For 30 years, you have treated my mother, my grandmother, and me as a stain on your reputation. You mocked our lives, our work, our breeding. She looked directly at Beatrice. You were right about one thing, Aunt. It is a matter of breeding. My grandmother was bred from a line of character. She gave that to my mother. My mother gave it to me. We were taught integrity, resilience, and the value of hard work. Her eyes snapped to Julian. You were bred from a line of arrogance. You were taught that your name was a weapon and your wealth a shield. You were taught that you deserved everything and earned nothing. You laughed at me tonight, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You laughed at my dress. You laughed at my job. You laughed at my life. You held a toast to withered branches. She stood tall, and for the first time everyone in the room saw the shadow of Arthur Pendleton in her posture, the steel in her spine. Well, the withered branch just inherited the entire forest. The mouse it turns to owns the cheese. The shift in power was absolute and instantaneous. It was as if gravity had reversed. Now, Emily, Marcus began, his voice suddenly oily and placating. He tried for a smile, but it was a hideous grimace. Let's not be hasty. We're family. We can work together. I can mentor you, guide you. Julian can stay on as COO. You need us. Emily let the silence hang for a moment. You're right, Uncle. We are family. And as family, I'm sure you'll be happy to help me with the transition. Marcus brightened. Yes, of course. Excellent, Emily said. She turned to Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne, please schedule an emergency all-hands board meeting for 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. I will be presiding. Of course, Miss Vance. Ms. Reed, Emily continued, please initiate an immediate full-scale forensic audit of the last 10 years of Pendleton Global's financials. I want a specific focus on executive compensation expense accounts and all acquisitions, especially the recent one in Singapore. Julian's bloodshot eyes widened in panic. You can't do that. That deal is sensitive. If it's sensitive, it should be handled delicately. I'm very delicate, Emily said. I am, after all, just an archivist. I'm excellent at reading fine print. She turned back to Marcus. Uncle, you will have your resignation as chairman on my desk by 8:00 a.m. You will retain your board seat for now. As for your mentorship, I don't think I need guidance from the man who leveraged this company to the brink of collapse in 2008. Marcus staggered back, speechless. Aunt Beatrice, Emily said, turning to the woman, the Pendleton Foundation, you are no longer the chairwoman. I will be taking over effective immediately. I'm sure the public library will be very grateful for our newfound focus on humble service. Beatrice made a small, choking sound. Finally, Emily faced Julian. He was shaking a mixture of rage and terror. You can't do this to me, he whispered. You asked me if I still take the subway. Julian, Emily said, walking closer to him. I do. It's efficient. But tomorrow I'll be taking the private elevator to the 80th floor, the CEO's office. You, however, she looked him up and down just as he had done to her. You will be cleaning out your desk. You are not the COO. You are not the CEO. You are not even an employee. Your security pass will be deactivated at midnight. I believe you have 3 hours. You bitch, he spat. You'll have to be more specific, Julian, Emily said, unfazed. Your fiancée Chloe looks a little upset. You might want to reassure her that your trust fund is still, well, that it still exists, for now, assuming you don't file that lawsuit. Chloe, who had been watching her entire future dissolve, burst into tears and ran from the room. Emily had dismantled them piece by piece with the same methodical precision she used to catalogue a medieval manuscript. She looked at the rest of the table, at the pale, shocked faces of the cousins who had laughed at her. The dinner is over, she announced. Thank you all for coming. She turned to the butler, who was watching with wide, respectful eyes. Please call me a car, a simple one. A black Lincoln town car will be fine. Yes, Ms. Vance. He said Ms. Vance, as if it were a royal title. Emily walked to the foyer, retrieved her simple wool coat, and put it on. Mr. Thorne and Miss Reed joined her. That was, Mr. Thorne began. Impressive, Miss Reed finished. Your great-grandfather would have been exceptionally proud. He left me a very difficult job, Miss Reed, Emily said, buttoning her coat. He left me a company full of wolves. So he did, Thorne said, opening the massive front door for her. The cold night air felt wonderful. But it seems to me, Miss Vance, he left it to the only lion in the family. Emily nodded. She walked out of the mansion, not looking back at the shattered family dinner behind her. She left them in the ruins of their arrogance, the laughter still echoing in the opulent room dead and hollow. The heavy silence in the Blackwood mansion which followed Emily's departure was not an ending. It was a vacuum, a pause before the thunderclap. For the Blackwoods, it was the suffocating silence of absolute defeat. For Emily, it was the quiet 400 a.m. hum of a single-cup coffee maker in a 400-square-foot Brooklyn studio. She had not slept. After the town car dropped her off, she had walked past her sleeping doorman, climbed the 4 flights to her apartment, and locked the door. The adrenaline of the confrontation had felt like a live wire humming beneath her skin. For a few moments, she had stood in the center of her small room, surrounded by her books, her quiet life, and simply breathed. She owned a $70 billion multinational corporation. The thought was so absurd, so monumental that her mind, trained to categorize and order, struggled to file it. It was a fact without a precedent. But an archivist knows that history is not just about grand, sweeping events. It is about the small, meticulous details that build a case. It is about the paper trail. And the Blackwoods, in their arrogance, had left a paper trail a mile wide. At 4:15 a.m., her phone buzzed. A secure text from a number she didn't recognize, but the message was clear. "I'm in. The files you requested are unlocked. You were right. He buried it 3 layers deep. S.J." Emily permitted herself a small, grim smile. S.J. was Sarah Jenkins, the Executive Vice President of Finance, a brilliant, overlooked woman who Marcus Blackwood had repeatedly passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified men who belonged to his golf club. Emily, in her first act of due diligence the night before, while the Blackwoods were still laughing at her dress, had found Ms. Jenkins. She had made a high-risk, high-reward gambit, sending her a single encrypted message. "I know what Julian is doing with the Singapore acquisition. I am the new owner. Help me, and you will be my COO." It had taken Sarah Jenkins exactly 45 minutes to respond. Now, with the final piece of evidence in her possession, Emily Vance showered the hot water, washing away the lingering scent of the Blackwoods' opulent dining room. She did not dress in silks or power suits. She chose her armor carefully. A charcoal grey sheath dress, severe and elegant. Her sensible heels. Her hair was pulled back into the same simple, functional chignon she always wore. She was not a Blackwood. She was an archivist, and she was going to work. At 7:30 a.m., a new town car, this one sent by her law firm, was waiting. At 8:30 a.m., she walked into the lobby of the Pendleton Global Tower on Park Avenue. The lobby was a cathedral of black marble and brushed steel. The security guard's men, who would have dismissed her as a cater waiter the day before, snapped to attention. Their eyes were wide. The all-night memo from the legal department had been disseminated. "Ms. Vance, good morning." The head of security, a man named Doyle, looked as if he'd seen a ghost. "Mr. Doyle." Emily said, her voice calm. "Please ensure that Mr. Julian Blackwood's access is fully revoked. If he attempts to enter the building, have him politely escorted from the premises. No scenes. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am. We already handled that, ma'am. At 2:14 this morning. He was not polite." "I expected as much," Emily said. "Thank you for your professionalism." She was escorted to a private wood-paneled elevator that required a unique key. It opened directly onto the 80th floor. The executive floor. The doors slid open to a hushed, antique carpeted reception area. A terrified-looking executive assistant, who had clearly been Julian's, leaped to her feet. "Miss Vance, Mr. Blackwood." "Mr. Marcus Blackwood is attending the board meeting," Emily said, not unkindly. "I am not here to purge staff, Miss Patel. Cynthia Patel." "Ms. Patel, I am here to restore order. Please get me the minutes from the last 4 board meetings and a large black coffee. Then please call Human Resources and inform them that Ms. Sarah Jenkins's promotion to Chief Operating Officer is effective immediately. I want her in my office, this office." She gestured to the grand double doors at 10:30 a.m. "Yes. Yes, ma'am." Cynthia Patel looked at Emily with dawning, unadulterated awe. Emily nodded and walked toward the boardroom. This was it. She pushed open the heavy oak doors. The room was silent. It was a long, cavernous space, dominated by a table that looked like it was carved from a single redwood tree. On one side, a wall of glass offered a godlike view of Central Park, green and distant. On the other, a massive, imposing oil painting of Arthur Pendleton himself, staring down at the proceedings. Seated around the table were the 7 remaining board members. At the far end, looking grey, shrunken, and utterly broken, sat Marcus Blackwood. The other 6 were the men who had propped up his reign for decades. There was Lawrence Henderson, the slick, silver-haired head of a major investment bank, a man who believed he, not Marcus, was the true power. There was General McTavish, retired a man from the defense contracting world, who saw Pendleton as a personal bank. There were 2 empty suits, cronies, who voted however Marcus told them. And in the corner was Dr. Evelyn Hayes, an academic from Wharton, the board's single-token woman who Emily knew from her research was consistently ignored. They all stared at her. Emily walked her heels, clicking with metronomic purpose, not to an empty seat on the side, but to the grand, high-backed chair at the head of the table. The chairman's seat, Arthur Pendleton's seat. She placed her leather satchel on the floor, sat and folded her hands on the table. She said nothing. She simply waited, letting the silence stretch, forcing them to acknowledge the shift. Finally, Lawrence Henderson, the banker, broke. He gave a forced, paternalistic chuckle. "Well, Ms. Vance, Emily, this is quite the turn of events, quite the drama." He smiled as if sharing a joke. "I knew your great-grandfather, a fine man, a strong man. I'm sure he would have been amused by this." "Amused?" Emily's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. "I doubt that Mr. Henderson, my great-grandfather, from all accounts, detested being played for a fool." Henderson's smile tightened. "Now, Emily, let's be practical. You are, as we all now understand, the majority shareholder. A remarkable development. But a title is not the same as experience. This," he gestured around the room, "is a $70 billion machine. It has many complex moving parts. You are an archivist." "I am," Emily agreed. "Exactly," Henderson said, leaning forward, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, let-me-help-you tone. "What you need is a steady hand. You need guidance. You have the shares, yes. But we, this board, we have the expertise. I propose we formalize a new structure. You, of course, can take your great-aunt's place as head of the foundation, a noble, visible role, and you can retain the chairmanship in title, but you will delegate all executive authority to a new CEO, someone tested, someone like me." General McTavish grunted his approval. "Good plan, Lawrence. Solid. The girl gets the title, we keep the engine running. No fuss. The markets will understand." Emily listened, her expression unreadable. When they were finished, she looked at each of them one by one. "You are correct, Mr. Henderson," she said. "I am an archivist, and you are correct, General. This is a complex machine. But you have all made a fundamental and frankly lazy error in judgment." She opened her satchel and pulled out a single, neatly bound file. "You've mistaken my profession for a weakness. You think because I work with the past, I cannot function in the present. But what does an archivist do? We read. We cross-reference. We find the paper trail. We uncover the truth that people have tried to bury. We more than anyone know exactly where the bodies are buried." She placed the file on the table with a soft thud. "Which brings me she said, to the Singapore acquisition. Marcus Blackwood made a small, strangled sound. Henderson's face for the first time lost its smirk. "A brilliant deal, Julian called it," Emily continued. "A masterstroke. You all voted to approve it yesterday morning, unanimously. A sound, strategic move," Henderson said, his voice now clipped. "Expanding our footprint in the Asian logistics market." "Stop," Emily said. It was not a request. "Stop lying." She stood and walked to the digital projector at the end of the room. She plugged in a thumb drive. The first document that appeared on the massive screen was the incorporation filing for Caspian Holdings Group, the company Julian was acquiring. Caspian Holdings Group, Emily narrated, her voice as dry as old parchment. Registered in the Cayman Islands. Its listed assets are, well, nothing. It's a shell corporation filed 6 weeks ago. She clicked to the next slide. A list of signatories. And who is the sole director of this worthless shell company? A man named Richard Devane. A collective sharp intake of breath. Even Dr. Hayes, the quiet academic, sat bolt upright. "Richard Devane," Emily said, "as in the father of Chloe Devane, Julian's fiancée. You were not voting to acquire a company, gentlemen. You were voting to approve Julian's $400 million wedding present to his future father-in-law." The room exploded. That's preposterous," Henderson blustered, but sweat was beading on his forehead. "Marcus, what is this?" General McTavish roared, turning on the grey-faced man. "You let your boy do this. I didn't know," Marcus whispered, a pathetic defense. "Julian, he handled the file." "You signed it, Marcus," Emily snapped, clicking to the next slide. Marcus's heavy, arrogant signature was at the bottom of the wire transfer authorization. "And you," she said, her gaze sweeping over the other board members, "were all legally required to perform due diligence. You are the board. You are the final line of defense. Did any of you ask for the asset sheet? Did any of you look into the provenance of Caspian Holdings? Or did you just take Julian at his word? Collect your $100,000 board fee and go to lunch." Silence. The no was deafening. "So," Emily said, "this is not an acquisition. It's felony embezzlement. It's wire fraud. It's conspiracy. And you gentlemen, by voting yes without a single question, are all at best guilty of gross, catastrophic negligence. And at worst," she let the word hang, "complicit." Henderson went white. McTavish looked as if he was going to be sick. This stays in this room," Henderson hissed. "We can unwind it. We kill the deal. No one has to know." "No," Emily said. "I kill the deal, which I did at 6:15 this morning by placing a call to the Attorney General's office and the SEC. I informed them that as the new majority shareholder, I had uncovered significant active fraud and was moving to stop it and cooperate fully." The men looked at her in pure, unadulterated horror. She hadn't just beaten them. She had annihilated them using their own laziness as the weapon. You what?" McTavish gasped. "You'll destroy the stock price. You'll ruin us." "I will save the company," Emily corrected, her voice like ice. "By cutting out the rot. The market doesn't like fraud, General. It loves a new owner who cleans house." She walked back to her chair and sat down. "So here is what is going to happen," she said, a general addressing her defeated troops. "Mr. Henderson, General McTavish, and your 2 associates. Your resignations on my desk. Now." She slid 4 sheets of paper and a pen down the table. "You will resign effective immediately for personal reasons. In exchange, when I am asked by the SEC, I will state that you were not active conspirators, but were deeply negligent and misled by the previous executive. I am offering you the chance to walk out of this building with your reputation in tatters, but without an indictment. It was a brutal, brilliant move, a complete checkmate. Henderson, shaking with rage, grabbed the pen and signed. McTavish followed his face, purple. The other two signed so fast they nearly tore the paper. "Dr. Hayes," Emily said, turning to the only other woman, "you also voted yes. Why?" Dr. Hayes looked up, her eyes clear. "Because when I asked to see the due diligence file in the pre-meeting, Mr. Henderson told me not to trouble my pretty little head with the numbers and to trust that the men in the room knew what they were doing." Emily nodded. "You will remain on the board. In fact, you will be heading the new Compensation and Ethics Committee. I expect your first report in 1 week." Dr. Hayes looked at Emily, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I accept." The 4 men stood defeated. They were old, powerful, and utterly obsolete. They filed out of the room, not even looking at Marcus. Now only 2 were left. Emily Vance at the head of the table, and Marcus Blackwood, stranded at the other end, a king in his castle now reduced to a prisoner. "Emily," he croaked, his voice thick. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll retire. I'll go away. Don't take the house. Beatrice, it will kill her. It's family." "Family?" Emily repeated the word, tasting like ash. "You mean the family you laughed at? The family you humiliated? The family whose name you were so desperate to erase, even as you lived off the scraps of her father's genius?" She stood up and walked the length of the table until she was standing over him. "You have your 20% stake, Uncle. You have the house. You have the jet. My great-grandfather, in his wisdom, left you that. I am bound by his will. I will not take also what is yours." Marcus looked up, a pathetic flicker of hope in his eyes. "But your job," Emily said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your title, your power, those were never yours. You were a steward, a placeholder, and you failed. Your resignation was on my desk at 8:00 a.m. as I requested. Your access is revoked. Mr. Doyle will escort you from the building." "Emily," he begged, "your grandmother, Amelia, she would not have wanted this." Emily stared at him, her gaze so cold it seemed to burn. "My grandmother would not have wanted her name spit on at your dinner table. My grandmother would have wanted her father's legacy protected." She turned away from him. "Goodbye, Uncle." She walked out of the boardroom, not looking back. She heard a single broken sob, and then the heavy door clicked shut behind her, sealing the past away. She walked into the CEO's office, her office where Cynthia Patel and a sharp-looking woman with a fiery expression were waiting. "Ms. Vance," the new woman said, stepping forward and shaking Emily's hand firmly. "Sarah Jenkins, I've seen the reports. It's worse than we thought, but it's fixable." "Good," Emily said, "because you're my new COO. Let's get to work." Emily spent the next 10 hours in that office, initiating a full-scale corporate restructuring. She sent out a company-wide memo. "My name is Emily Vance. I am the new owner. The era of arrogance is over. The era of excellence begins now. Your hard work, not your last name, is what matters here." At 9:00 p.m., she finally left. She declined the company car and driver. She walked 10 blocks and took the 4 train downtown. She got off at the Brooklyn Bridge City Hall station and began the walk home, the cold November wind whipping at her coat. The magnificent, glittering skyline of Manhattan, the city she now, in a very real way, owned a piece of sprawled out before her. She stopped at the center of the bridge, looking at the dark, churning water below. She was an archivist, a preserver of history, but today she had become its author. The Blackwoods had tried to write the Vances out of the story, to reduce them to a forgotten footnote. But Emily Vance, the quiet librarian, the last of her line, had just written the final chapter. And it was a reckoning. And so Emily Vance, the woman they mocked, took her seat at the head of the table, not just for dinner, but for the rest of their lives. This story shows us that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the moves you prepare in silence. The Blackwoods thought she was a mouse, but they forgot that a mouse can chew through the ropes of a lion's net. In the end, it wasn't her name that gave her power, but her character. What did you think of Emily's ultimate revenge? Was it karma or was it justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of drama and a powerful comeback, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to see that the underdog can win, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories where karma is the final word. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.
He dumped his pregnant wife for a younger mistress. Now she's a millionaire without him. Meet Natalie Whittaker, a woman whose heart once brimmed with unwavering devotion for the man she believed would stand beside her through every obstacle. Little did she know, her husband, Richard, harbored a secret desire for new thrills, a yearning that would ultimately drive him to abandon their marriage and their unborn child. What unfolds next is a tale of heartbreak, betrayal, and the extraordinary path that turned Natalie into a self-made millionaire. Now, with her success echoing from conference rooms to charity galas, she's the one calling the shots. Strap in for twists, turns, and a dose of karma you won't soon forget. Natalie Whittaker first noticed something was off when Richard started coming home late from his managerial job at Tennyson Real Estate. Richard had once been punctual to the point of obsession. He believed timeliness was the hallmark of a man with a plan. Then, without warning, he began working overtime. Initially, Natalie chalked it up to professional ambition. After all, they shared dreams of a comfortable home in the suburbs, perhaps starting a business together, and raising their soon-to-be child in a stable environment. She was 3 months pregnant, glowing with excitement and maternal anticipation. But the late nights grew more frequent. Richard's phone seemed glued to his hand, and he guarded it like a treasure chest of secrets. Whispers that once accompanied romantic confessions turned into curt one-liners. Natalie tried to reason with herself. Maybe the stress of an upcoming child was weighing on him. Maybe he felt the crush of financial responsibility. She tried to assuage her mounting suspicion with the logic of love that perseveres, love that forgives, love that endures life's storms. So she convinced herself that what truly mattered was the life within her, a growing spark of hope. Despite the hormonal fluctuations, the morning sickness, and the swirl of anxiety, she maintained a bright smile whenever he walked in the door. She still prepared him dinner, though the dinners often sat untouched because he claimed to have eaten at the office. She still tidied the living room, anticipating the moment he'd collapse on the couch and cuddle up with her to watch their favorite shows. But that moment never came. He was either too tired or claimed to have more work to do. One rainy evening, as thunder rattled the windows of their modest condo, Natalie was startled by the sound of the front door slamming. Richard, dripping from the storm, stood in the foyer glaring at her as though she'd committed some grave offense. Before she could greet him with her usual warmth, he threw down his soggy briefcase and muttered, "We need to talk." The tone sent a chill through her. Her heart pounded, because in those 4 words, spoken with cold finality, she sensed the unraveling of everything they had built together. Richard demanded that they separate. He spewed a list of reasons he wasn't happy. They'd grown apart. He wasn't ready for fatherhood. He needed freedom. The words assaulted Natalie in quick, cruel bursts, each one slicing her like the shards of a broken mirror. Her pleas and tears did nothing to soften him. It was as though he had steeled himself for this moment, forging a resolve that brooked no argument. He simply repeated, "This isn't working. I'm sorry." The desperation in Natalie's voice escalated. "We have a child on the way," she sobbed. "How can you do this now?" Richard's face registered a flicker of pain, but it vanished before she could fully recognize it. He replied with something she never expected to hear, "I know this is terrible timing, but I can't live a lie." She felt her world collapse. Every memory, the spontaneous road trips, the shared coffee runs at Starbucks on chilly mornings, the vows they exchanged in front of friends and family, now seemed meaningless. He was gone, and he was taking with him the naive innocence she once had about love and commitment. What Natalie didn't know at that moment was that this was only the tip of the iceberg. While she battled an avalanche of emotions, Richard had already orchestrated his exit strategy. He'd rented a pricey apartment across town, one far beyond what they could afford under normal circumstances. More shocking yet, he already had someone waiting there for him, a woman named Isabel, a bright-eyed 20-something who basked in the glow of Richard's attention and entertained him with her impulsive flirtations. And so began Natalie's harrowing journey, abandoned, pregnant, and desperate for answers. Yet a spark of strength lay hidden in her soul, waiting for the right moment to ignite. One day, that spark would become a blaze, and not even Richard's betrayal or Isabel's allure could extinguish it. The day after Richard left, Natalie awoke in a haze, her face stained with the dried tracks of tears. She stared at the empty side of the bed where he once slept, where his presence had been a comfort, a promise of unending love. Now that space felt like a gaping abyss, a testament to his abrupt departure. Her phone buzzed incessantly, messages from worried friends, missed calls from her mother. She knew she had to face them eventually, to say, "Yes, it's over. Richard left." The prospect of uttering those words made her stomach churn. She kept turning the phone over in her hands, trying to summon the courage to open her messages. Even the simplest text, "Are you okay?" felt like a trap. She wasn't okay, and she had no explanation to offer beyond betrayal and heartbreak. By mid-afternoon, she braved the shower, letting hot water pummel her tense shoulders. The steam might have eased her physical aches, but it did nothing for her soul. She pressed her hand against her lower abdomen, thinking about the child growing within her. That child was now the only reason she could find to get out of bed, to eat, to face the day. The baby represented hope, a possibility that her future didn't end because Richard had chosen someone else. Determined not to let her emotions paralyze her, Natalie pulled on a comfortable sweater and leggings, then ventured out to the local grocery store. She needed essentials. The baby needed prenatal vitamins, healthy foods, and a stable environment. As she picked up fresh fruits and leafy greens, her gaze drifted to couples strolling by, a husband holding his pregnant wife's hand, a pair of newlyweds giggling over dessert choices. Her chest constricted at the stark reminder of everything she had lost. At the checkout line, she was greeted by a former neighbor from her old apartment building, Miss S. Turner, who was known for her unstoppable curiosity. "Natalie, dear, how is that handsome husband of yours?" The older woman chirped. The question stabbed Natalie in the heart, but she forced herself to smile politely. "He's "Not living with me anymore," she managed to say. Miss S. Turner's face crinkled with concern and confusion. "Oh dear, I'm sorry to hear that. You poor thing. Do you need any help?" Natalie shook her head, politely declining. The exchange felt both humiliating and surreal. On her way home, she passed by the Starbucks, where she and Richard used to grab lattes every Friday morning. A memory slammed into her, the first time they'd ventured there as a couple. He had teased her about her complicated order, a grand soy latte with extra foam, and she had teased him about his black coffee with 3 sugar packets. She could almost hear his laughter again, feel his arm around her waist as they stood waiting for their drinks. Now, the shop sign felt like a mocking ghost of the happiness she once knew. That evening, after unloading her groceries, Natalie sat on the living room couch, the silence thicker than any she'd known. She opened her phone at last and responded to her mother with a simple text. "Richard left. I don't know what to do, but I'm trying to cope. I love you, Mum." Moments later, her phone rang. It was her mother, frantically asking questions, voice trembling with concern. Natalie's resolve to keep it together broke. She wept openly, recounting the confrontation with Richard, the callousness of his departure, her confusion about the future. Her mother offered to fly in to support her. "No, Mum, I need to handle this on my own," she insisted. "I'll let you know if it gets too overwhelming." When she ended the call, there was a glimmer of pride within her tears. She realized something monumental. Her independence had always been there, beneath the layers of wife, partner, caretaker. She loved Richard, but she wasn't helpless without him. That night, she forced herself to write down the first steps toward her new reality. 1. Hire a lawyer, someone who could help navigate the separation and safeguard her and her unborn child's rights. 2. Schedule an appointment with her OB-GYN to make sure stress wasn't harming her pregnancy. 3. Look into part-time income or remote jobs. Richard might have been the primary breadwinner, but she was determined to stand on her own 2 feet. As she wrote, a tear slid down her cheek, but her hand remained steady. She was anchored by a fierce maternal instinct, a protective drive she never knew she possessed. Even if her world had been shattered, she was determined to rebuild brick by brick, day by day. The next day, under a grey sky that matched her mood, Natalie trudged into a lawyer's office. She had never even contemplated needing a divorce attorney. Her vision of marriage involved growing old together and celebrating each other's achievements. Yet here she was, a cardboard folder of personal documents clutched in her hands, feeling simultaneously anxious and resolute. Cynthia Morrison, a friend of a friend recommended by her mother, welcomed Natalie into her office with warm professionalism. After offering her a seat, Cynthia explained the process of legal separation and the steps they'd need to take to ensure child support. The conversation was practical, but each step felt like swallowing shards of glass. Filing for divorce, requesting spousal support, negotiating custody, these were words she never thought she'd associate with her own life. Yet hearing them from Cynthia gave her a sense of control. At least now she had a map, even if the terrain looked daunting. Later that evening, as Natalie scrolled through her social media, feed a mindless habit she'd acquired to distract herself, she stumbled upon a photograph that jolted her entire body. It was Richard, beaming alongside Isabel. She appeared younger, carefree, clad in a trendy outfit that suggested indulgence in luxury stores. The pair stood outside a French bistro downtown, arms wrapped around each other. The caption read, "With my love, enjoying a new chapter, #blessed, #new beginnings." Natalie felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. The brazen display of affection, of a new life, left no room for the illusions she had clung to. Any hope that this was a temporary lapse in Richard's judgment evaporated in the face of that photograph. Not only had he left her while she was pregnant, he was proudly flaunting his new relationship as though he'd finally been released from some prison. Her initial reaction was to throw her phone across the room, but then anger took hold. How dare he celebrate while she carried his child alone, struggling to piece together her life? How dare he trivialize the vows they shared? Tears of fury welled up in her eyes, but in the depths of that anger, a new resolve was born. She realized something crucial. She could either remain the wounded, discarded ex-wife, or she could transform her pain into a catalyst for something greater. That realization didn't come gently. It was fueled by heartbreak, righteous indignation, and a will to protect her unborn child. But it crystallized in her mind. She had to build a new life, and that life needed to be one she was proud of. Let Richard have his shallow escapades. Let him indulge in illusions of youth and excitement. Natalie had real responsibilities and real dreams to fulfill. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone from the floor. She responded to a text from Cynthia, confirming she was ready to proceed with the paperwork. Then she opened an email from her former college roommate, Aisha, who now ran a small design firm. The subject line read, "Possible opportunity?" Intrigued, Natalie clicked it open. Aisha wrote that she had just landed a major contract with a local non-profit organization aiming to revamp their entire marketing platform. They needed someone adept at project management and administrative tasks, someone reliable. Could Natalie be interested in coming on board, at least on a part-time basis? Natalie stared at the email. She had experience as an administrative coordinator before she married Richard, but she'd given it up when she moved to his city. The prospect of working again excited her, though fear nibbled at her thoughts. Could she handle this responsibility while navigating a pregnancy and emotional turmoil? But then she remembered her vow to shape a life she could be proud of. She typed a reply without hesitation. "I'm interested. Let's talk details." Weeks passed in a blur of appointments, phone calls, and emotional ups and downs. Natalie formally filed for divorce, taking the first step in unraveling the legal knots that bound her to Richard. She simultaneously delved into her new job with Aisha's design firm. Part of her questioned whether she could juggle it all, but each day she discovered fresh reserves of strength. Her mornings began with journaling, a habit she picked up during her therapy sessions. Dr. Alvarez, her therapist, suggested she use the journal to process her grief, rage, and hopes. At first, Natalie wrote timidly, as though afraid her emotions would come alive and overwhelm her. But soon, she found herself pouring her heart onto the pages, venting every thought that swirled in her head. This practice became her lifeline, a way to navigate the chaos of her life. Aisha's firm thrived on creativity. Though Natalie's role was administrative, she often found herself peeking into the brainstorming sessions, absorbing the excitement of new campaigns. Before long, Aisha noticed Natalie's keen eye for design and marketing possibilities. She encouraged Natalie to contribute ideas, eventually giving her a chance to manage smaller projects. With each successful task, Natalie's confidence grew. It was like waking up from a nightmare and realizing daylight still existed. One evening, after an exhausting but fulfilling day, she returned home to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a handwritten note from Richard. The words on the page were contradictory, laced with guilt and defiance. He wrote that he was sorry for the timing, but also insisted she accept the reality that they had grown apart. He rationalized his relationship with Isabel as something that just happened and asked for an amicable resolution to their divorce. Natalie read it twice, tears sliding down her cheeks. In a strange way, the note offered closure. It confirmed that Richard's betrayal wasn't a momentary lapse, but a conscious decision. He was done, and so was she. Rather than respond with anger, she tucked the note away. She had more pressing matters, like her next ultrasound appointment. At the doctor's office, an ultrasound technician guided the transducer over her belly, and the screen came alive with the form of a tiny baby. The technician pointed out the developing hands, the heartbeat flickering like a small, determined light. Emotion overwhelmed her, but this time it wasn't just sadness. It was awe, wonder, and a fierce, protective love. She recorded the heartbeat and stored the ultrasound images in her phone. One day, her child would see that from the moment Natalie learned about her pregnancy, she fought every day to bring them a stable, loving world. On her way out, she decided to indulge in a warm drink at Starbucks. It was an emotional test, walking into the place she had always associated with Richard, but she realized that her memories didn't belong to him alone. They were a part of her life too, and she had the right to create new memories here. As she sat down with her latte, laptop open, she reviewed a marketing pitch she planned to deliver to Aisha the next morning. She felt the baby kick for the first time, a delicate flutter that nearly made her gasp out loud. A smile crept across her lips. In that moment, she felt the intangible shift, a sense that her life was not defined by Richard's abandonment, but by her choices. She was forging her own path, fueled by the love she had for her unborn child and the love she was learning to have for herself. While Natalie was diligently rebuilding her life, Richard and Isabel basked in their honeymoon phase. They moved into a luxurious high-rise apartment downtown, complete with a rooftop pool and a view that overlooked the city skyline. Isabel posted pictures on social media, each snapshot capturing exotic dinners, spontaneous getaways, and shiny gifts that Richard lavished upon her. Their captions read like taunts: "Living our best life, chasing dreams, power couple." It seemed, on the surface, that they were enthralled by each other's company. Behind the glitz, however, cracks were forming. Richard's job was demanding, especially now that he was paying for a penthouse he could barely afford. He was also receiving letters from Cynthia Morrison, Natalie's attorney, warning him about overdue spousal support payments. Whenever those letters arrived, Isabel would roll her eyes. "Can't you just handle this?" she would say, feigning disinterest. She liked the idea of being with a successful older man, but she didn't want to be burdened by the baggage of his previous marriage and pending child. Desperate to maintain Isabel's interest and keep up appearances, Richard worked longer hours, pushing for bigger sales at Tennyson Real Estate. The stress mounted, but he pressed on, convinced that he could provide Isabel with the lifestyle she seemed to crave. At the same time, he ignored Cynthia's repeated notices, convinced that he could somehow negotiate a minimal payout. After all, he rationalized, Natalie was capable of supporting herself. She had a new job, didn't she? However, those illusions of control began to slip when he discovered how determined Natalie truly was. The details of her legal demands were unyielding and entirely justified: child support, a fair share of their marital assets, and coverage for prenatal and postnatal health care. Richard grumbled to his own lawyer, complaining that Natalie was being unreasonable. His lawyer, a dispassionate man named Larson, disagreed. "She's entitled to these terms, especially considering your child's well-being," Larson said. "We can attempt negotiation, but the courts favor the mother, particularly in a case like this." That night, Richard returned home to find Isabel sprawled across the white leather couch, scrolling through her phone, a bored expression on her face. She didn't even look up when he entered. "Hey," she murmured, "did you close that big sale you mentioned? We need to book flights to Cabo next month." A flicker of annoyance crossed Richard's face. "I'm working on it," he said through clenched teeth. He tossed his keys onto a table strewn with designer shopping bags. The apartment was cluttered with items. Isabel had recently purchased a pair of brand-name heels, a Givenchy perfume set, and expensive decor pieces. Each new acquisition chipped away at the savings he once had, but he couldn't bear to voice his concerns. He was convinced that if he just held on a bit longer, a large commission would solve everything. Yet as he stood amidst all these tokens of luxury, pangs of regret gnawed at him. He thought of Natalie, the woman he once pledged to love forever. She had never demanded extravagance. She found joy in small things, a simple picnic, a weekend trip to the countryside, a heartfelt letter. Now, the only messages he received from her were reminders about legal obligations he had tried to avoid. Late into the night, Richard lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Isabel slept soundly beside him, oblivious to the turmoil swirling in his mind. A part of him whispered that his life had spiraled out of control, that he had made a grave mistake leaving Natalie. But he shoved that thought aside, convincing himself that if he could just secure the next big real estate deal, everything would be fine. This was merely a phase, a rough patch. His grander ambitions would triumph, and he would prove to everyone, especially Natalie, that he wasn't the villain she might believe him to be. Unbeknownst to Richard, the woman he left behind was no longer the passive, pleading wife he remembered. She was forging a new identity day by day, one filled with purpose, strength, and budding success. And soon, fate would place them both on a collision course that neither could have anticipated. For Natalie, life's turning points often arrived in subtle disguises. One such moment occurred on a chilly fall afternoon when Aisha invited her to a meeting at a local non-profit headquarters. The building housed a remarkable organization called Kids Path, which provided educational resources and mentorship programs for underprivileged youth. They were desperate for a new digital presence, a complete overhaul of their website, social media campaigns, and promotional strategies. As Natalie listened to the non-profit's director, a spark illuminated her eyes. Their mission resonated deeply. She had always cherished the idea of empowering children, giving them opportunities to succeed regardless of their socio-economic backgrounds. That synergy of personal passion and professional skill ignited a fire in her. She carefully took notes, asked pointed questions about their target audience and budget constraints, and proposed an outline for a phased project plan. By the end of the meeting, the director was visibly impressed. "You've got a sharp mind for strategy," she told Natalie. "We'd be thrilled to work with you on this." Aisha beamed, proud of her friend's newfound confidence. But she also recognized that Natalie might be capable of more than just project management under someone else's umbrella. Later that evening, after everyone had left the firm, Aisha pulled Natalie aside. "Do you ever think about starting your own consulting company?" she asked. Natalie's eyes widened. "My own company? That's a huge leap, Aisha. I'm barely holding it together as is." Aisha smiled sympathetically, gesturing to the visible baby bump. "I know you've got a lot going on, but your potential is undeniable. I see how you light up in these meetings. You're not just following instructions, you're leading. Maybe not now, maybe after the baby is born, but keep it in mind." That night, Natalie lay awake, pondering Aisha's words. The idea of running her own business intrigued her. She imagined a small consultancy specializing in marketing and branding for non-profits and socially conscious startups organizations that truly aim to make a difference. The notion of combining her professional expertise with a desire to do good in the world made her heart soar. Yet reality intruded. She was 7 months pregnant, grappling with a divorce, and strapped for cash, even with her part-time work. Where would she find the capital, the time, or the emotional energy to start a company from scratch? But the dream refused to die. She began devoting her spare moments to researching small business grants, crafting a provisional business plan, and brainstorming a name. That was how Ascendant Vision Consulting was born, initially just a name scribbled in her journal, but soon morphing into a tangible plan with mission statements, service offerings, and a skeletal website. With renewed vigor, Natalie tackled the Kids Path project. It became a prototype for her future ambitions, a testament to what she could achieve if she poured her passion and expertise into something she believed in. The project flourished. The non-profit's website traffic skyrocketed, donations doubled, and partnerships formed with local schools. Word of mouth spread quickly in the non-profit community, leading to more inquiries about the marketing firm behind Kids Path's transformation. Meanwhile, Cynthia continued to navigate the legal labyrinth of the divorce. Richard remained evasive, often missing deadlines for financial disclosures. But each missed deadline only strengthened Natalie's case. The court was unsympathetic to Richard's delays. Eventually, Cynthia informed Natalie that she might be entitled to a significant settlement and monthly child support once the baby arrived. Every so often, in the quiet hours of the night, Natalie's mind drifted to Richard. She wondered how he was coping, whether he felt even a twinge of regret for abandoning her. But each time, she reminded herself that she had a new path to follow, one that required all her focus. She refused to be shackled by the past. While Natalie found her stride in new endeavors, Richard's carefully constructed illusions were crumbling. His high-pressure job at Tennyson Real Estate saw cyclical fluctuations. When sales dipped, commission checks shrank. The strain of financing an extravagant lifestyle with Isabel bore down on him. Credit card bills multiplied, with interest piling higher each month. In the midst of it all, Isabel's fondness for shopping sprees and upscale getaways never wavered. One evening, Richard returned home, exhausted from a fruitless day of showings. Isabel was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, complaining that her friends were all traveling to Bali this season, and she felt left out. She demanded that Richard plan a similar trip for them soon. Guilt and frustration warred within him. He didn't want to disappoint Isabel. He feared losing the only semblance of excitement and affection he had left. So he dug deeper into his dwindling savings, promising they'd jet off to Bali the following month. It felt like a sickening replay of the scenario he'd once avoided with Natalie. Back then, his ambition had always been to ensure security, not frivolity. With Isabel, he found himself trapped by her expectations of instant gratification. But in weak moments, Richard told himself that perhaps he deserved this. He had chosen youth and excitement over commitment and loyalty. Now, he was paying the price, and the price was steep. His dissatisfaction peaked one chilly evening when he took Isabel to a trendy rooftop lounge. The city lights glittered below, the music pulsed with an electrifying beat, and wealthy patrons mingled. Isabel sipped her cocktail and engaged in flirtatious banter with a group of stockbrokers at the adjacent table, ignoring Richard completely. He felt invisible, a mere wallet with a pulse. The pang of jealousy and regret in his gut became too big to ignore. He excused himself to the restroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Who had he become? It struck him how lonely he felt, even in the presence of the woman he claimed to leave Natalie for. At least with Natalie, he never questioned his sense of belonging or self-worth. The mirror offered no comfort, only a reflection of a man tangled in mistakes. He returned to the table, feigning a smile. Isabel barely noticed. She was too busy showing off her new designer handbag to the stockbrokers. That night, while Isabel slept, he scrolled through social media out of habit and noticed something curious: references to a marketing success at Kids Path, a non-profit. Tucked within the congratulatory posts was a snippet of praise for Ascendant Vision Consulting, headed by the incredibly talented Natalie Whitaker. The words jolted him. He recognized that name. He knew that ambition, that flair for organization. His ex-wife was forging a path, one that apparently involved launching her own consultancy. A swirl of conflicting emotions gripped him. Pride, perhaps. Jealousy? Most definitely. Guilt? Overwhelmingly. He thought about messaging her, something along the lines of "Congratulations" or "I'm glad you're doing well." But an invisible barrier prevented him. How could he congratulate the woman he left when he was the one who initially doubted her potential? Instead, he shut his phone off and tried to sleep. The city lights danced across the ceiling, reminding him that not all that glitters is gold. Natalie's final trimester brought with it physical discomfort, sore feet, difficulty sleeping, bouts of heartburn, but also an electrifying sense of anticipation. The closer she got to her due date, the more she focused on building a stable world for her child. She had managed to save a modest amount from her part-time work, and as Ascendant Vision Consulting garnered more interest, she began planning for an official launch once the baby was a few months old. Every day, she felt the baby move, a reassuring sign that life went on inside her, despite the storms swirling outside. She transformed a spare bedroom into a makeshift nursery with soothing colors and a second-hand crib she found in excellent condition. One evening, she hung a mobile above the crib, delicate stars and moon shapes that sparkled when they caught the light. A tear of gratitude slipped down her cheek. She couldn't wait to meet the little soul who had already given her life new purpose. In the final month of her pregnancy, she received a surprising phone call from Tennyson Real Estate's legal department. They wanted to confirm certain aspects of her separation from Richard, possibly in anticipation of some internal policy changes. The conversation was brief, but it left her with a jolt of curiosity. Why would Richard's company care about her status? It wasn't long before she discovered the reason. News broke that Tennyson Real Estate was restructuring, cutting costs, and consolidating roles. Richard's position was deemed redundant, and he was on the verge of losing his job unless he could prove he was indispensable. Natalie felt a pang of sadness. Regardless of what he had done, he was still the father of her child, but the sadness was tempered by the knowledge that this was the life he chose. He had gambled everything for a fleeting thrill, leaving her to struggle alone. Now the consequences were catching up to him. In a rare moment of weakness, she contemplated calling him, offering some comfort or advice. But she quickly dismissed the idea. They were no longer partners in life. His choices were his own, and so were hers. Her priority now was her child, her new career, and her emotional well-being. As her due date approached, Natalie went through the final legal steps to secure her divorce settlement. Cynthia informed her that the courts ruled in her favor for a fair share of the marital assets and mandated child support. In theory, it was a victory, but the lingering question loomed: would Richard even have the means to pay if he lost his job? Natalie's water broke 2 weeks early. Alone in her apartment, she felt a surge of panic, but managed to remain composed enough to dial 911. Soon, she was en route to St. Joseph's Hospital, heart pounding with adrenaline and worry. She had planned a more methodical approach to labor and overnight hospital bag, a steady drive to the maternity ward, perhaps a calming playlist. Instead, she found herself in the back of an ambulance, breathing through contractions. Her mother arrived at the hospital within hours, anxiety etched into her features. She fussed over Natalie, offering words of encouragement and wiping the sweat from her forehead. As the contractions intensified, Natalie clung to her mother's hand, tears mixing with sweat. "I can't do this," she whimpered at one point, but her mother, eyes brimming with empathy, whispered, "You already are, sweetheart. You're stronger than you know." After an agonizing labor, Natalie welcomed a tiny baby girl into the world. The moment the infant was placed on her chest, everything else receded: Richard's betrayal, the financial uncertainty, her worries about the future. None of that mattered in the face of the new life staring up at her with wide, curious eyes. She named her daughter Maya. In the days that followed, Natalie felt as though she were learning an entirely new language: diapers, midnight feedings, quiet lullabies in the small hours of the morning. Each time Maya cried, Natalie's heart clenched, but she discovered reservoirs of patience and love she never knew she possessed. Exhausted but joyful, she often simply watched Maya sleep, marveling at the miracle of her existence. Richard didn't visit. Part of her had expected that. He sent a text, a curt hope, "Everything went well, congrats." She didn't bother responding. She was busy savoring the magic of these first moments with Maya and adjusting to a world in which she was the sole provider of comfort and security for this tiny human. Nevertheless, the spectre of financial realities still hovered. Hospital bills were steep, even with insurance. Although the court mandated that Richard share the burden, Natalie knew that enforcement could be a battle. For now, she felt compelled to focus on her recovery and her baby. Thoughts of pursuing back payments or legal threats would come later. One Sunday evening, as she gazed at Maya sleeping soundly in the crib, Natalie felt a surge of motivation. In that moment, she vowed to give her daughter a life filled with love, opportunity, and security. She vowed to show her daughter that even when you've been cast aside, your worth lies in your own hands. She vowed to stand as an example of resilience and ambition. Because love, once shattered, can be rebuilt in unimaginable ways. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of late-night feedings, dirty diapers, and stolen naps. It was chaotic yet rewarding, and amidst it all, Natalie found pockets of time to refine her business plan for Ascendant Vision Consulting. The success of the Kids Path campaign had sparked interest among other nonprofits, and offers for freelance work trickled in even as she was nursing Maya. Determined to seize this momentum, Natalie registered Ascendant Vision Consulting as an official business. She used her modest savings to build a professional website, design a logo, and rent a small co-working space that she could use a few times a week. With Maya carefully tucked in a baby carrier or watched by a trusted neighbor, Natalie spent hours on conference calls and client meetings. Her passion for aiding meaningful organizations shone through, and her personal story of perseverance quietly inspired those she worked with. Cynthia, seeing Natalie's resilience, urged her to pursue the financial support mandated by the court. Richard, however, had become elusive. Rumors circulated that he was let go from Tennyson Real Estate after a failed attempt to salvage a major account. Word on the grapevine suggested he was scrambling for freelance gigs, his polished lifestyle slipping through his fingers. Isabel's social media posts had turned bitter, filled with subtweets about broken promises and needing real men who can provide. The relationship was on rocky ground. Natalie felt a twinge of pity for him, but mostly she felt relief that she no longer bore any responsibility for his choices. She had her own battles to fight, raising Maya and elevating Ascendant Vision from a local curiosity to a reputable consulting firm. And fight she did. Her business acumen soared through trial and error. She spent sleepless nights studying marketing trends, devouring books on entrepreneurship, and perfecting her client pitches. Aisha continued to offer support from her own design firm, occasionally collaborating on joint projects that showcased both their strengths. Together, they delivered stunning campaigns for clients in education, community outreach, and environmental sustainability. Slowly but surely, Ascendant Vision became profitable. Clients shared testimonials praising Natalie's work ethic, her ability to empathize with organizational values, and her knack for delivering outstanding results within tight budgets. Before she knew it, she was speaking at local entrepreneur meetups, sharing her story of personal reinvention. Each time she mentioned her journey, pregnancy, heartbreak, and forging a new life, audiences were riveted. After her talks, people queued to hand her business cards, propose partnerships, or simply express their admiration. Life was still hectic. Maya's presence meant that any semblance of a rigid schedule was impossible, but Natalie learned to adapt. Some days, she conducted business calls while bouncing Maya on her knee. Other days, she typed proposals at 3 a.m. after Maya finally fell asleep. Yet through the exhaustion, a sense of purpose fueled her. She was building a future for herself and for her daughter. Amid the flurry of new contracts, speaking engagements, and media buzz around Ascendant Vision, Natalie received an email that nearly made her heart skip a beat. It was from Tennyson Cares, an offshoot philanthropic program started by Tennyson Real Estate. They were hosting a charity gala to fund scholarships for young adults pursuing careers in sustainable housing. The email extended an invitation for Ascendant Vision Consulting to participate as a partner, helping to bolster their marketing strategy. The invitation was surreal. Tennyson Real Estate was the very company that once employed Richard, the company indirectly linked to her tumultuous past. She wondered if the invitation was merely an automated outreach to various agencies or if someone there specifically requested her firm. Either way, it felt like a full circle moment. Though trepidation fluttered in her stomach, she refused to let personal history derail potential growth. Ascendant Vision was bigger than her past with Richard, and the philanthropic nature of the gala aligned well with her company's mission. She accepted the invitation, meticulously preparing a presentation that showcased how Ascendant Vision could amplify the reach and impact of the scholarship fund. On the day of the meeting, she wore a modest but professional suit, her hair neatly pulled back. A wave of nerves threatened to overtake her as she stepped into Tennyson's gleaming skyscraper, but she reminded herself that she was there on behalf of her business, her future, and her daughter. Inside a spacious conference room, she was greeted by a team of Tennyson executives and PR managers. The meeting commenced smoothly. Natalie delivered her presentation with poise, illustrating the actionable steps they could take to connect with potential donors, highlight success stories, and create engaging content. She referenced her previous success stories, using data and anecdotes to prove Ascendant Vision's credibility. Midway through her presentation, the door opened, and in walked Richard. He looked a shadow of his former self, thinner, dark circles under his eyes, the confident swagger gone. She paused, her voice catching for a split second. He froze at the sight of her. The room went silent. Trying not to let her composure slip, Natalie continued, but she could feel Richard's gaze drilling into her. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. The Tennyson executives were visibly impressed. One of them stood to shake her hand. "That was brilliant," he exclaimed. "We'd love to have Ascendant Vision on board for this project." Natalie graciously accepted, ignoring the fact that Richard was lingering near the back, waiting for everyone to disperse. Once the meeting concluded, the executives filtered out, leaving the two of them alone for the first time since he'd walked out on her. The tension was palpable. He opened his mouth to speak, his voice shaking. "Natalie, She cut him off gently, not out of malice, but because she felt no need to hear his explanations or apologies anymore. "I'm glad you're well, Richard. Let's keep this professional." Her tone was calm but resolute. His eyes darted to her left hand, noticing the absence of a wedding ring. "I heard about your success, about the baby," he said softly, almost wistfully. She nodded, offering no details. She owed him none. Moments later, she collected her notes and excused herself. As she walked out of the conference room, she felt a swell of pride. She wasn't that timid, broken woman begging for him to stay. She was a force and entrepreneur, a mother, a woman steering her own destiny. If Richard had glimpsed any regret in her eyes, it was overshadowed by the radiance of her accomplishment. After that unexpected reunion, Richard found himself haunted by what might have been. He'd lost Isabel. She walked out on him a few months earlier, frustrated that his finances were crumbling and that he couldn't maintain the lavish lifestyle she craved. He was now surviving on sporadic freelance real estate consulting gigs, but his debts kept piling up. The tension of living beyond his means had finally snapped. Seeing Natalie prosper, especially in the very building where he once thrived, rattled him. He had always assumed she would remain the same woman he walked away from, fragile, pleading, overshadowed by the responsibilities of single motherhood. The woman who commanded that conference room bore no resemblance to the broken wife he'd left behind. It forced him to confront the magnitude of his mistakes. Desperate for stability, he approached Tennyson's philanthropic division for a position, hoping they'd remember his past accomplishments. They allowed him to handle administrative tasks on a trial basis. That was how he ended up in that conference room, witnessing Natalie's triumph firsthand. The contrast between their trajectories was painfully clear. One day, he summoned the nerve to email her. The message was hesitant, laden with awkward apologies and attempts to reconnect. He offered to be involved in Maya's life, to help out if needed. He stopped short of outright begging, but the undertone was there. Financially strapped and emotionally adrift, he saw a chance to cling to whatever vestiges of family he might salvage. Natalie stared at the email for a long time. Her heart ached for Maya's sake. Every child deserved to know their father's love, if it could be given genuinely. But she also refused to open the door to half-hearted involvement or let Maya be a pawn in Richard's attempts to redeem himself. With careful deliberation, she wrote back, stating that if he wished to be in Maya's life, it would have to be consistent and respectful of her boundaries. He would need to honor the child support arrangement, keep his communication civil and supportive, and earn the trust both she and Maya deserved. To her surprise, Richard responded that he understood. He sounded meek, as though all the bravado had seeped out of him. He asked if he could at least see his daughter. After mulling it over, Natalie agreed to a supervised meeting in a public space, a small park near her apartment. When the day arrived, Richard showed up in plain clothes, carrying a teddy bear. He looked nervous, sweat beading on his forehead despite the crisp weather. Maya, now nearly a year old, gazed at him with innocent curiosity. He tried to engage her, but she clung to Natalie's leg, wary of the stranger before her. Eventually, with some coaxing, Maya took the teddy bear, momentarily distracted by the novelty of it. Richard's face was a tableau of regret and longing. He tried to hold Maya, but she grew fussy, wanting to return to Natalie. He didn't push it. He simply studied her, as though memorizing every detail of the child he had neglected. Natalie watched, torn between relief that he was making an effort and resentment for all he had missed. They parted with no promise of reconciliation, no illusions about their relationship magically healing. Natalie made it clear that if he wanted a role in Maya's life, it had to be on Maya's terms. "Take it one step at a time," she advised gently. Richard nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. For what? She wasn't entirely sure. Maybe for allowing him a chance to glimpse the child he'd abandoned. Maybe for embodying forgiveness she hadn't explicitly granted. As Maya grew, so did Ascendant Vision Consulting. In a short span, Natalie expanded her client list to include small businesses and ethically driven startups, not just nonprofits. Her ability to empathize with clients and craft powerful campaigns made her a sought-after figure in marketing circles. Financial security followed, and with it came new possibilities. She upgraded her apartment, enrolled Maya in a reputable daycare that doubled as an early learning center, and even managed to set aside savings for the future. Invitations to speak at entrepreneurial summits and women's empowerment conferences poured in. Each time she took the stage, Natalie felt a rush of gratitude and determination. She spoke candidly about her journey, the heartbreak, the pregnancy, the divorce, the drive to succeed. She wanted other women, especially single mothers, to see that adversity could be a springboard, not a cage. One particularly significant moment arrived when she received an invitation to speak at a TEDx event. The theme was resilience, turning pain into power. She labored over her speech for weeks, wanting to strike the right balance between personal story and universal lessons. In front of a packed auditorium, she delivered a talk that began with the night Richard left and ended with a depiction of the thriving life she had built for herself and Maya. The audience erupted into a standing ovation. After the talk, several women approached her, tears in their eyes, thanking her for offering hope and inspiration. The video of her talk went viral, accruing millions of views within days. Requests for interviews and collaborations skyrocketed. The sudden fame felt surreal, but Natalie took it in stride. Her priority remained Maya, protecting her child's well-being amidst the spotlight. She was cautious about how much personal detail she shared publicly, but she never shied away from highlighting the importance of self-reliance, hard work, and emotional healing. Amid her meteoric rise, rumors circulated that Richard's financial situation had spiraled. Debt collectors were on his trail. He was working odd jobs, even rumored to be driving a rideshare to make ends meet. Natalie learned all this through mutual acquaintances and social media chatter, but she chose not to dwell on it. Her focus lay on cherishing the life she had painstakingly rebuilt. One evening, while scrolling through her emails, she paused at a message from an unknown sender. It read simply, "I see how far you've come. I'm sorry. I wish I had been man enough to stand beside you, Richard." She stared at the words, an emotional storm brewing within her. She felt sorrow for him, but no longer heartbreak. She felt compassion, but no inclination to rescue him. She quietly closed her email and went to check on Maya, finding her fast asleep in her bed. Leaning down, Natalie kissed her daughter's forehead, murmuring a silent vow of gratitude that their future was no longer dependent on Richard's choices. The turning point that catapulted Natalie from comfortable success to bona fide millionaire status came through a strategic partnership with a tech startup specializing in educational applications. They needed a marketing genius to guide their product launch. Given Ascendant Vision's track record, Natalie was their first choice. The startup soared, their app revolutionizing how children accessed learning materials online. In exchange for her services, Natalie had negotiated a partial equity stake in idea. She borrowed from reading business case studies during her late-night study sessions. When the startup went public, her shares turned into a life-altering windfall. Almost overnight, her net worth shot past the $1 million mark. She recalled the day she checked her online trading account to see the numbers. A wave of astonishment nearly knocked the wind out of her. She'd officially become a millionaire. The magnitude of it felt both exhilarating and sobering. She remembered nights spent wondering how she'd afford diapers, how she'd put food on the table without Richard's support. Now she had the means to ensure Maya's future and fund causes she cared about. True to her roots, Natalie didn't plunge into extravagance. She maintained a comfortable home with a proper room for Maya and upgraded a few essentials. But the bulk of her newfound wealth went into business expansion and philanthropic endeavors. She set up a scholarship fund for single parents pursuing higher education, naming it the Whitaker Scholarship for Resilience. The press lauded her as a champion of empowerment, a woman who turned adversity into impact. Meanwhile, Richard's life spiraled further. The loss of his job and the burden of insurmountable debt forced him to file for bankruptcy. Isabel was long gone, posting about her new love on social media with no acknowledgement of her past. Richard took odd jobs, eventually settling on a modest apartment in a less affluent part of town. The lavish furniture, the panoramic views, the designer clothes, all were repossessed. Sold off, or abandoned. One day, as Natalie was driving back from a charity event, she glimpsed a figure that looked unsettlingly like Richard, standing at a bus stop. She wasn't entirely sure it was him, but the stooped shoulders, the haunted eyes, those details registered in the corner of her vision. She kept driving, heart pounding. In a swirl of conflicting emotions, she knew that if it was indeed Richard, he had sunk to a place she never imagined he would be. It was a stark reminder of how drastically life can shift when fueled by poor choices and selfish motives. She breathed a silent prayer for him, though it was unclear what she prayed for his redemption or simply to let go of whatever lingering ties her heart still held. In that moment, she felt only gratitude for the path she had chosen. She had faced heartbreak, betrayal, and the daunting task of single motherhood. And she had risen above it all, forging a life built on integrity, resilience, and love for her daughter. Indeed, she was a millionaire without him, but more than that, she was whole, confident, and free. Thank you for joining me on this turbulent yet triumphant journey of love, lost, self-discovery, and unwavering determination. Natalie's story stands as a testament to the power of resilience, proving that even the deepest heartbreak can become the cornerstone for a remarkable new life. She refused to let betrayal define her, transforming hardship into an empire of her own, making one that benefits not just herself, but also the world around her. If you found inspiration in this tale, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need a spark of hope, and subscribe for more stories that illuminate the incredible strength hidden within the human spirit. Your support helps spread these messages of courage, empowerment, and second chances. Thank you for watching, and remember, every ending can become a powerful new beginning if you choose to rise.